Welcome early in the morning. Thank you. Uh, Good morning and welcome everybody. We are privileged to have with us sorry, it's early for me, part of our continuing series where we're going to talk to professors, lawyers, philosophers, columnists, writers, reporters, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody who can form complete thoughts and have something insightful to say about where we are in America, how we got here, how we might be able to get out of here when it comes to political polarization. With us today, it is our privilege to have Jonathan S. Gore. He's the Associate Chair and Professor of Psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Dr. Gore received his PhD in psychology at Iowa State University and is an active member of the Society of Personality and Social Psychology and the Southeastern Society of Social Psychologists. He's also a faculty supervisor of the EKU chapter of the National Society of Collegiate Scholars. Currently, he's an associate professor of the psychology department with a research focus on goal motivation, self-concept, and culture. Very relevant to what we're looking at here. Since joining the faculty at EKU, Dr. Gore has published over 20 articles and book chapters on these topics, as well as topics developed over the years with the students. His research assistants are actively pursuing their own interests, and they have presented at such venues as the Undergraduate Presentation Showcase at EKU, Kentucky Psychological Association, and the posters at the Capitol in Frankfurt. Dr. Gore's research interests also corresponded with his teaching interests. He teaches social psychology, cultural psychology, and research methods to both undergraduate and graduate students. He also teaches his boot camp course every summer, which gives students the experience of writing and submitting their own research paper for publication. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
They never had that when I was in college, so I don't know, a little bit of jealousy. That actually sounds cool. Some of the research that the professor has done is Who Am I Becoming? A theoretical framework for understanding self-concept change, relational motivation and well-being, a cross-cultural comparison, subjective well-being, predictors of academic citizenship behaviors, locus of control and well-being, separating the measurement of internal and external constructs, the effects of frustration on subsequent task performance, been there, the influence of close others in daily goal pursuit, individual differences that moderate the effectiveness of relational reasons for self-improvement, patterns of adaptive performance by individuals with autism spectrum disorders on behavioral assessment system for children 2, basic 2, relational self-control and its relationship to academic citizenship behavior. We already did that one. And differences in proactive and reactive aggression in traditional bullies and cyberbullies. So a lot on how humans think, identify, and behave. Some of the positions he's had was the director of undergraduate research at Eastern Kentucky University. He's also been the associate professor at psychology at Eastern Kentucky, and he was also associate professor before that at Iowa State University, or temporary instructor, sorry.
Correct.
And this is the research where I found the professor. But before we get to that, let's check in and see how well I did. Professor, did I say anything wrong? Do I need to correct something? Was there anything that was misstated?
Well, this is making me realize how much my online presence is probably a little outdated. You can see my picture is about 15 years old.
I was gonna say, I didn't want to say anything. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm a full professor now. Coming up on about 80 articles and publications. I'm no longer director of undergraduate research as of just about a month ago, but I'm also associate chair of the department, and a lot of this, my research interests are pretty much the same, and a lot of my passions are still the same. So most of that was correct, and I just realized whatever my online presence is, I definitely need to update that, and probably should get my new headshot in there too.
It's a good looking picture. I mean,
it's not bad.
I'd go with what you got now, though. I mean, you got a jacket. You look good. So
that's my pre-marriage, pre-kids picture there.
Oh, wow. I am not going to comment on that. So I have a brother, and I don't want to hear about it. Full professor now, 80 articles, no longer director of undergraduate research. And then there was one other thing. I forgot.
Associate chair.
Associate chair. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And okay, wanted to correct that. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. If we did that, okay. And what is this article about? conflict of interest, relational self-control and decision-making in interpersonal contexts. What is this about in general?
So I think this is mostly about the big things that we want and the little things that we want. So the big things that we want for our lives versus the little things that we want in the day-to-day decisions that we make. So for a while there, I was working with Dr. Susan Cross at Iowa State on this relational self-control. It basically means people who define themselves based on close relationships. So more inclined to say, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a brother. And those are very important aspects of who I am. So people who think that way are more inclined to want to make sure that their relationships are going well. And that's like a big want. That's the capital W want in their lives. So if I and someone close to me have a different opinion or different preference of what to do in the moment, I'm more inclined to be okay with us going along with what that other person wants to do, because that feeds back into the big want of making sure that relationship goes well. So people who are highly relational are less likely to think of things in terms of like, if I have to give something, if we have to do what you want to do, then I have to give something up, which is called a zero sum perception. And that can go towards individuals, that can go towards groups, that can go towards countries, in terms of like, if we have to sort of concede to you, that means we have to lose something. So it's really thinking a lot differently in terms of, I can gain something by going along with what you want instead of what I want in the moment. So that's really the gist of that. And it really, the more I thought about that, I thought, well, this wasn't directly a political polarization paper, but in some ways it may be explaining some of the mechanisms that might allow it to happen, and also might allow it to be resolved. So it might be a psychological mechanism where less zero-sum thinking would allow us to think more in terms of, if we go along with what this quote-unquote other side thinks, we might not necessarily lose something if we can keep sort of a coherent and collegial culture together and society together. So these are just some of the things that I was thinking about when I thought about that article being mentioned for the sake of this, and it not being directly related to political polarization, but it may be explaining a mechanism that could explain why it works, and may also explain how we could maybe resolve it.
I completely agree. So, it's called political polarization, and people think that it exists completely within the world of political science. But it does not. At least after January 6th, what we're looking at is some sort of sociological factor now. It's jumped the board from one academic discipline of just purely political science to now something else. It's like a movement, a cult, some sort of mass formation or something. So I absolutely agree. I think it's related. I think there's a lot of people saying right now that the rise of people who support Donald Trump, the MAGA movement, are participating in what you're calling zero-sum thinking. If someone else gets something, I lose something. I see other people rising up. I feel my lot in life is not doing as well as it was in the past. Therefore, I'm losing. Someone's taking something I used to have. I'm losing as a community. I believe the best example that I've heard from some other professors was the Unite the Right rally, where you had a bunch of people saying, I will not be replaced.
Right. White replacement theory is what that's called.
Yeah. They're afraid of, I'm going to, this America is for me and someone that looks like me and my identity. And it used to be the 1980s, and we used to be on the top of the mountain and calling the shots. And now we're losing. We're losing everywhere. Everyone's not doing as well. I see other people doing well. So therefore, my group's losing. So I'm mad. I'm angry. I want to fight to get back what I lost. There seems to be a lot of that as an explanation for MAGA and Trump and others. And there does seem to be some evidence of that. There's a lot of people in the areas across America that had high voter turnout for Trump, had really high levels of unemployment and death due to pharmaceuticals and methamphetamines, et cetera. So there was some overlapping data. Let me take it a step back. This paper came out in 2009 and
2011.
2011.
Yep.
You've been in America this whole time. How bad do you personally view, and I understand this is a little bit outside your academic field, but how bad do you personally feel political polarization is today? And how bad has it become now in 2023 versus 2011? You were sort of looking at an adjacent field. I know, not exactly in 2011. It's 10 years later. Just as an academic, but also as an American with two working eyeballs, as I like to say, are things bad now? Have they gotten worse since you were looking at this? How much worse have they gotten, in your opinion? And I understand this is outside the academic field, but just as a human who's been living in these times and is able to think thoughtfully.
Yeah. So social and cultural psychology can definitely inform a lot of this in terms of the describing the problem and proposing some solutions to it. And a lot of these, this all involves people, and it all involves people interacting with others. So that allows social psychology to have something to say about it, thankfully. So I would say the best way to describe this is almost like a seesaw, where people were sort of mostly standing in the middle of it and rocking it slightly. And then you started having people jumping on either side of it, and it starts to do this. So it's like there's a balance, but it's a crazy balance where everyone is trying to keep it upright, but they're doing it by jumping on either end of the seesaw. So I wouldn't say. I mean, disagreement and discourse are important for a healthy society to be able to have.
Sure.
When everyone agrees, that's when the real problem is happening. When everybody agrees, that's usually a sign that there's widespread oppression happening.
Right.
And we could certainly see in the days of American history, when there was widespread agreement, you also saw widespread oppression happening there as well. And you see that in smaller groups too. So it's kind of like, it's like the seesaw. It's also like if you were to drive down the road and you just crank the wheel one way and crank the wheel the other way and crank the wheel one way. It's like you get down the road, but you're going it's crazy. So it's not so much that we've run off the road yet, and it's not like it's broken yet, but we need to somehow get it back to, the people who are getting all the sort of airtime and the people getting all the time to be able to explain what's happening are not the ones who are, on the either ends of that spectrum and drawing the line and saying you're either on my extreme side or this extreme side. It's like that's ridiculous for us to put it that way. But I mean, I'm a Gen Xer too, so I remember pre-internet. I remember when there was, 3 options for news, and it was all basically the same. It was the 3 major networks, and that was it. And there was much more of sort of a common communal experience in those days. And I'm not saying that was better. There was definitely some voices that were not coming into play there. But what we have now is a very unique circumstance in American history, where you have a very globalized community where we're very much aware of what lots of people around the world and within our own country are doing. But our experiences are hyper individualized, where we have, social media algorithms keep us in our sort of pockets and our bubbles. The pandemic kept us isolated in our own, pockets and bubbles. So we're aware of other people, we're aware of them, but we're increasingly only being exposed to and interacting with us, our in-groups. So we're in a sense where our sense of the out-group is expanding, while interaction with the in-group is also expanding. And that's where I feel like a lot of those are very symptomatic for polarization, where it's getting to the point where my reality and your reality can completely differ. My Google search and your Google search will completely differ. And my sense of what's happening and what your sense is happening could be completely different. It's just we're in these sort of pockets that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is when you're seeing your pocket as sort of the right way, and seeing these other groups as almost like they're not needed. There's no utility to this other group. There's no point in listening to this other group. That is where a lot of this sentiment is really gaining traction. And we also have we have livelihoods that are very different than it used to be. We have people who are gaining livelihoods through attention, so gaining attention from other people. We have an attention economy, and let's all get together and try to solve these problems doesn't get as much attention as these people are terrible. Join my group and we can act self-righteous and together and talk about why these people are terrible. There's
I'm sorry. This is serious, but
you get a much better psychological boost by feeling you are better than other people than feeling that you are exactly the same as everybody else. So that gains more attention, that gains more, and there's an incentive to be that way. And I think that lots of people have figured that out and are sort of utilizing that to their probably mostly personal advantage. But that's also fueling this problem where we're seeing, the people who are getting the microphone are getting megaphones, and they're talking about how terrible this other side is, and we're losing our ability to have this type of discourse, and we're also running into a very big problem that would be considered a seed of a preliminary seed of genocide, in the sense of seeing the other side as not necessary, and the world would be a better place if they weren't here. And that is the most concerning sentiment, I think, that I see. I'm not worried about disagreement. I'm not even worried about passionate disagreement or even extreme disagreement. It's more, I no longer see the point of this person existing anymore, or this group existing anymore. I don't see them as serving any function or contributing at all to society. That is a very dangerous path to be on. And we need to really dial that one back, and start seeing the utility of people who are have different cultural and experiences and different livelihoods than us, different belief systems, different values. I feel like a lot of people who disagree with me in terms of societal and political things, I think they probably have some very important contributions to be able to balance things out based on how I see things, and they might see some blind spots that I don't see. They might be aware of some things that I don't know. They might know how to do things I don't know how to do. So I personally try to take on a much more, people who are different than me serve a function in society. So even if I don't agree with them, I still see that they have a purpose. And trying to figure out how to communicate with someone who disagrees with me is tricky. But I do not venture down the road of, let's just get rid of these people because the world would be a better place if they weren't even here. That is extremely troubling to be able to hear things like that from any person. So
that is a brilliant point, and I haven't heard anybody bring that up. That's a brilliant point. Done a lot of reading, a lot of interviews. I haven't heard anybody bring that up, because you do see that we don't really need them. What's the point of them? They're just a drag on America, our society, and both sides saying that about the other. And you're right. That is how it got started. Jewish people were an integral part of German society in 1920, and then comes to the 1930s, and suddenly we don't really need them, and that just leads to all sorts of problems. one of my favorite stories was there was like 100,000 Jewish people who fought for Kaiser Wilhelm in World War I. 10 years later, they were garbage. We don't need those guys. But they were like combat vets willing to die for Germany because they saw themselves as Germans. And a few years later, we don't need them. You're not Germans anymore. We don't need them in our society to be good Germans. And that concept first. And I also like to point out to people, they rounded up, I think, the communists first. And we don't need those people. So, yeah, you're right. That's a bad way to go. Let me ask you something. Let's get back to, if we can, the rise of the echo chambers due to TV news and social media. I've heard of that as a cause for political polarization. Some people are saying, like you said, we had 3 TV stations back in the day. Then you have CNN. Then Fox News comes and is more polarized, but one side, and then MSNBC launches, and they're like, well, we're going to go for the other side, and CNN sees that model and jumps on that. And then you have social media companies, I think coming around 2015, 2016, at least rising to popularity around that time, and they're all about making money, all of them. And the more clicks and eyeball views, the more money. And as we've talked about, I'm sure Professor Psychologist, you'll back me up on this, that humans seem to react well to drama and conflict. And those people make me angry versus, let's have a kumbaya moment and talk about how, flowers are pretty together and, we all love our kids. And stuff. And so, but the question that I always have when I ask people about this is, if these are corporations, and the goal of corporations is to make massive profits, and using divisiveness and anger gets them the most amount of views they found compared to anything else, that's why they're doing it. How are we going to get them to not do the thing that got them record profits?
I mean, it's going to require a very strong push of widespread awareness that the point of this is not to inform you, but to earn your attention and therefore earn money. I think when Americans in particular realize that they're being taken, being used and manipulated, they really we don't like that too much. And so I think just that awareness of, the point of this is it's not for your benefit, it's for their benefit. And this being aware that you're being manipulated by that process. And we've created a process where, you could have someone who's just my kids love YouTubers. And I it's kind of foreign to me, but the idea of like a YouTuber just being like getting money based on how many views they get.
It's weird.
It's just like that, and they want to do it. And I said, well, the problem with that path you want to go down is that more people are going to watch you if you're doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing. And less people are going to watch you if you're setting a good example. So the question is, like, how do you do something positive but get people to watch it and get people to listen to it? So it's just, and I love what you're doing here, by the way. I think it's fantastic. And I can't wait to not just talk about this one, but also the other ones, that this exists. And this is a forum for allowing people to talk about these things and talk about solutions, and not just the problem of them. It's like, let's talk about solutions and approach the people who used to be them.
Thank you. Because no one's doing it. That's why I started doing it.
Yeah. And in some ways that is exactly the thing I was telling my kids. It's like, if you're going to do something different, but do something positive. Give people something that they can't find anywhere else, but it shouldn't be this terrible thing that people can't this disaster that people can't turn away from, or this, these terrible things that people are saying about others that you're not supposed to say, but you kind of get a joy from hearing someone else say it. Don't go down that path. Like, try to actually provide a new thing that's positive. So I love that. But it's
I
just,
really appreciate. I'll get you that money after the show. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate people recognizing that we get a lot of guff for reaching out to the other side and trying to say that we're liberals. So there's not a lot of love for that, which I find really interesting because we're talking about polarization is getting worse, and yet there's a lot of routine criticism for trying to reach out to the other side. But that's neither here nor there. Thank you.
But that goes into the like there's these the lines that are drawn in the sand, and it's kind of like if you tiptoe over to this other side, you're out. And it's just like, why? Why have we insisted on categorizing everything instead of looking at everything? I tell my students this all the time. If someone categorizes your personality or anything else about your psychology, I'm like, they're probably trying to sell you something, or they're trying to get you to join their club. Most psychological constructs do not exist in categories. They exist in continuums, and there's most of the people are in the middle. So I tell them, for example, you're probably not an introvert or an extrovert. You're probably an ambivert. Most of you are ambiverts, and a couple of you are probably introverts, and a couple of you are extroverts, but most of us are ambiverts. And I draw my normal curve, and like most psychology is this. And if you understand it as functioning like that, you're less likely to see, I have to be on this side or this side on this point. You can say, well, I can take a more nuanced opinion about some of these triggering issues that people feel like if you're on one side, then you cluster into this whole other belief and value system suddenly. And when people realize that that's also a manipulative strategy to get you to, do what they want and hate the other side, it's like, I don't have to take on that profile. I'm not obligated to take on that profile if I am on one side of the line or the other on some issue. I can have a very complex profile of who I am and what I think. And that confuses people, but then you give them the freedom to be able to be the same way. And then that allows us to talk more about, well, here's why I think, and here's the information I have. And this is where I'm coming from on this. And it might surprise people, and people might surprise you in saying, I know I live in Kentucky, and I come from Ann Arbor, Michigan. So of course I'm
okay.
much more progressive and liberal. So I talk to, Kentuckians who are, native Kentuckians who very much disagree with me, but we can have good conversations. And it's hard to hate someone when you know their first name and you interact with them all the time. It's just like, it's really hard to think of this person as having no utility or purpose. And you're like, well, this person is, my family or my friend or my colleague. And so just really taking the risk and being brave and just getting into these, conversations and realizing and not approaching it from this categorization way of like, oh, you're on this side or that side, but more how much do you, what's informing you and how much do you feel this is the case? And where are you on this sort of continuum in this line rather than which box should I check in terms of which belief you have and what belief I have? It's just, the whole categorization process drives me bonkers, and it happens all the time. And it's an easier way to understand the world, but it's very naive and it's ignorant and it's just not true. It's not supported by psychological evidence that most things are not categories.
Fair enough. I've heard from people about reaching out to the other side, focusing on trying to understand them instead of trying to change their mind. First comes understanding, then persuasion. But one thing that's bothered me, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, is a lot of people have said, well, okay, we had these people reach out to the other side and they learned to like each other and not hate each other as much. But at the end of the day, that didn't mean they agreed on any sort of policy issue. And when it came down to a vote, that they were going to vote on anything. So we would still be at the position where, okay, I don't hate you. I'm not as upset that I lost the election, but we have no progress on any of the major divisive issues at all. Have you seen something like that, or are you seeing something different?
I think it's probably the first step to having that conversation. But one other problem with us as Americans is we kind of want results right away, and that does not happen right away. I mean, it just doesn't. You can say, I had this conversation with this person, and we got along, but like, why didn't they change their mind? It's like, why should it change their mind? Why would it change your mind? So it's a much more long-standing type of thing. I think a lot of it is just, it's going to be very difficult to reverse the process of having everyone getting their information from just a infinite number of sources,
Right.
and no one knows how
Right.
to vet. No one knows how to vet that information. I think.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
my students will like absolutely testify for me. Like, Dr. Gore drives this home. Like, you have got to vet your information, and including scientific, psychological science. Like, how do you vet that information and know whether that is something that is good information or not as good information? But just going through sort of this process of, why should I listen to this person even if I do agree with them? How much weight should I put on this information that I'm getting? So again, like, Gen X experience as a kid, we had the library and we had the card catalog for looking up things, and like, there was maybe one book on that topic, and you kind of accepted that book as the book on that topic, and that was the information you accepted. And now it's like there could be thousands of books on a topic, and you're not sure what to think, and you kind of just go with, well, I guess I'll just go with the person who makes the most sense to me. But we're not training up ourselves on how to have informational and scientific literacy in breaking down, like, what is this good information or not good information? I also tell my students, like, you will not hear me say believe science no matter what, ever. And that you've got to be really scrutinizing of which scientific evidence is better than others. And I'm going to help you figure that out. And like, we need that as part of our educational curriculum, because it's no longer, can I find information on this, which is what my experience as growing up was, can I find information on this? Is that information is very accessible, but that information might be garbage. And we don't know how to figure that out. We haven't been trained up on, like, what's the process for determining if I've, these two things say that, two completely different ideas about the same topic. It's like, well, let's figure out what kind of evidence they are bringing to the table. And when we talk about not sides, but where did you get that information, and did you vet that information and evidence? It's much harder to actually even defend our own positions with such passion, because we realize the reality of many of these hot button issues are extremely complex and nuanced. And when we dive into it, we realize it works sometimes this way, and it kind of works another way and this other way, and it's very difficult to be on that end of the teeter-totter when you realize how nuanced so many things are. So it's just it requires a lot of sort of brain power and a lot of energy to put that into it. But just really having us defend our own position, not just because we're emotional about it or we see it as a more moral thing, but more just what's the evidence that we even have that for this belief system, and this attitude about things. And a lot of people most people don't do that, and most people don't even know how to do that. And that's where I become a little bit more of a crusader, where I'm just like, I honestly don't care where you land as long as you have great evidence for it. And you might even change my mind if you have really great evidence for it. But I'm going to put it through the ringer and make sure that it has really good evidence.
Well, I think that's awesome, because I remember reading for years for years before 2015 that critical thinking in universities was going down, and that corporations were talking about how they were getting a lot of college graduates from 2005 to 2015. And this is almost on no one's radar, who are lacking critical thinking skills. And now we get to a point where nobody can tell the difference between good and bad information. I think that the two are related. I also recall that you had the instance where the president was going to come up with an official fact checker to make sure to get down to this problem of what to believe. And the official federal fact checker herself had peddled misinformation. And it came out after they announced her. So I was like, wow, I mean, it's everywhere. And I remember, certainly I'm not a fan of Trump, but they said Trump did fake news. And then right after Biden got elected, he started saying, well, there was no COVID shots till we got here. And the news had to publicly correct him again and go, well, that's not true at all. I don't know why you even thought you were going to say that. So it seems like it never ends. It's in every corner. There's nothing you can do to fix it. So my question for you is let's say that this is a magic wand. These are the kind of questions I like doing with psychologists and philosophers, because you guys are able to think outside of the box a little bit more than others. This is a magic wand. Anything you wave at it, poof, automatically happens. So I'm handing you this magic wand and you go, poof, social media companies are responsible. Poof. No more polarized news. They try to Fox News starts trying to tell the other side, so does CNN. How long, given that people have been in this echo chamber and so angry, at least since 2015, some people suggest political polarization goes back to 1992. How long can you have people yelling and screaming and clawing at each other, and then you turn off the switch? Do humans snap back to the way that they were before all that? Or do they go, I kind of like the whole being angry and mean and screaming and yelling at the other person, even though they've taken away my social media news. I'm now programmed for that. I like that. My friends are based around that. My day's based around it. My identity is now based around that. Does that all just snap off and go back the moment we get rid of social media and news?
It's always hard to know how many of these things are feeding into existing human tendencies and how many of these are creating some of these human tendencies. I think a lot of us have to humble ourselves a lot and realizing that we do feel good when someone says you belong to the good group and they are the bad group. We need to realize that our ability to process information is extremely biased when we go with the human default. We need to really humble ourselves as human beings to realize how flawed we are in the way that we approach our world and social world and otherwise. So I think that's a first step. And if I were to poof anything, it would be like everyone getting that kind of humility to start with. But a lot of these sort of magic wand instances where you even policy magic wand instances do not, they create a new path to getting there. But so if you like the Civil Rights Act, for example, people see that as the end of racism. When everyone else knows that was not the end of racism at all. It just it changed into a different thing because humans, well, naturally get a boost from feeling like I'm in the better group. They just get that as a psychological boost. So just realizing that's almost a social drug of sorts that can be addictive, and saying like, maybe this really isn't a good thing for me to be thinking this way. And there's all these not so good consequences for my personal life, but also for societal's well-being of just thinking that way. So I think that, like I said, I mean, it's hard to dial back the whole awareness of everyone else on the planet. I think we probably cannot go back from that unless we just, I say that probably the biggest magic wand that would throw us all into chaos is an EMP, where all electronics just get shut down indefinitely. That would be like the biggest reset button we could do, with being aware of people in other countries and having this sort of media, affecting us and all that. Like, we would just completely start from scratch again in terms of how do we relate to each other now. And it probably would not be a very good start. It probably would make people pretty crazy for a while, but a lot of these structures we have in place allows these things to flourish. And it's just, a lot of it's, my recommendation is have more one-on-one conversations with people, like over a meal. Go back to square one of how humans talk and relate to each other, and not doing it through these channels of social media, which feels like a dialogue, but is actually just a series of monologues that you're talking at people more than talking with people.
Right.
You're not picking up on the nuances of the nonverbals, and you're not picking up on the consequences of disagreeing with someone passionately when you're in the same room with them. And I think those are in place for a reason. Those are natural, instinctive things that we're supposed to be picking up on in these conversations, and allows us to not be so far in one direction or the other.
Right.
So I would certainly not ever want an EMP to happen, but I would say, ease off of the technology a little bit and actually have, one-on-one, just normal conversations with people, and you'll find that you stop being so angry at this person, and learn how to communicate what you feel, learn how to realize, why do I feel this way? When people do a self-analysis of why do I feel so incredibly passionate about this point, they realize that most of it's just because of where you grew up, and a lot of it's just family culture and that your hometown culture. So much of that fuels that, and you realize, I actually have very little actual evidence for why I think this is going to work.
Right.
I actually have no good in-depth analysis or information. I just feel this is right, but you feel it's right because it was handed down to you through these different channels, without any crucial analysis to it either. So the college students not being great at critical thinking, and of course human beings not being very good at critical thinking. A lot of that's just a standard of presenting information as if that's the only way to think. And science is done this way. Science education, I'm a big crusader on this too. Science education is one of the worst about this, and saying, like, this is how things are, and there's no way that it could be otherwise.
Yeah.
And you can't argue against it. But it's like, that's science is a process of gathering and expanding and improving on our knowledge base. So of course it's going to change. So why would you teach it in a way as if it's not, as if it doesn't change? So
if I may, the thing I want to zero in on is, I know that if you have, let's say, two gangs and they just talk mean at each other, okay, maybe they can get over that. Maybe they get into a scuffle and someone gets punched in the face. No, they could get over that. One of them drives by and shoots down half of the other members of the other gang. And then the next day is told, let's stop having gang violence. Everybody come together. We're all going to put our things down and we're going to, sing Kumbaya and hold hands. That's hard to do. people
that,
seem
that doesn't work.
they seem to stay mad. I mean, if it was harsh words, maybe that's one thing. If that's punches, that's another thing. The moment you start killing people that they care about, well, they seem to hold that anger for a while.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if, we've been doing this social media thing since maybe 2015. We also had January 6th. I remember January 6th. I was at my mother's house. I was helping out with some chores. And I literally came around the corner and there was people storming the Capitol. And I just stopped in my footsteps for a few minutes.
Yeah.
My mom comes around the corner and she's old school Mexican. So it's like, I told you to do something, get out there and do it. And I was like, Mom, someone's storming the Capitol. And she goes, she knows I'm into politics. So she's like, I don't care what political theory you're talking about at this moment. And I go, no, look, they're storming the Capitol. And I pointed. And she had a trash in her hand, and she just dropped the trash right out of her hand on the floor. And she and I both just stared at the TV screen, completely silent for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. I'm 46 years old. She's in her 70s. I've never seen her behave that way ever in my life, nor have I ever just frozen in front of a TV screen, even on 9/11. And I also remember that after the Iraq War, the second one, my father was in the military, and he was saying he likes to go to the VA, talk war stories with the guys and get some medical coverage. And when the second Iraq War was happening, he goes, I saw him once, and he goes, well, I saw the new round, the new batch. And I go, what do you mean the new batch? And he goes, they got the same look as the dudes that came back from Vietnam. And I go, what do you mean? He's like, the 1,000-yard stare. Some people came back from Vietnam and they never actually returned. Their body was here. Their minds were shattered. They're still shattered decades later. They're never returned. They saw too much trauma. They just saw too much trauma. We saw it in Nam. We saw it in Iraq. Is there a concept for the American people where they have seen too much trauma? They saw their capital stormed first time since 1812. They saw the Confederate flag. That is a flag of a military that killed Union soldiers in the thousands upon tens of thousands. They also saw a Republican Party condemn that and then say, we're going to walk back our condemnation of storming the Capitol. I remember also on that day, I had two liberal friends here in California, and they didn't know each other. And I asked them about January 6th, and on that day, they both said the same thing in separate phone calls. Why didn't they line up all those conservatives and gun them down live on television? These people had never talked like that before, but on this day, they talk like that. So I'm wondering, is there something where people see too much trauma and they don't come back from it? Because it's not like you punched me in the face. It's like you shot 15 of my fellow gang members. And it's not going to be okay. And we can't return. Are we there yet? Is there such a concept?
So trauma is definitely not my area. I know lots of people who do very much know quite a bit about trauma, and including military trauma. But as far as political or societal trauma, I don't know if anyone has ever gone in that direction. But of course, prolonged or significant stressors can create PTSD-like symptoms, or PTSD itself, a diagnosable condition. So it's just, of course, that could happen. It depends on how much of a stress response we have to those images and to those, and how we respond is a lot of how we reacted to that. So I think if you look at some of the work, I'm always someone who looks at best practices.
Sure.
So what do we know about conflict resolution between gangs, for example, that works? Evidence that works. What do we know about intra-cultural and intra-societal conflict resolution? And we've had countries that have been able to at least approach and start and address reconciliation after extreme oppression or even genocide. It can be done. It's just, are we willing to look there and start saying we need to fix that? This is a relationship we have to have with each other, so we need to fix this relationship. We can't just all jump into the Atlantic and Pacific and swim somewhere else and hope for better somewhere else. I mean, we most of us want to stay here, and most of us are going to have to interact with the people that are here, and so we need to figure out a better way to do that. And just how do we come back from something like that? How do we process through the emotions that we're all feeling in a healthier way, rather than in a sort of vindictive and even aggressive, violent way towards this other group? And there's ways of doing that, but it's just, we need to have the willingness to be aware that that is an option, and then a desire to be willing to try it out. So it's just, I think it's just the whole idea that there's no way we can solve this problem is absolutely just as dangerous as whatever this other side is saying. If we're all just going to throw up our hands and quit and just say, never mind, let's not do America anymore, let's try something else, then we'll end up with some sort of consequence. Will we have a seceding states or whatever? I mean, will we have that kind of outcome? We're constantly in a society that's constantly in flux. We're a society that's, historically and culturally and politically and just extremely diverse. We're not all going to agree. So how do we do this? How do we talk to each other? How do we make sure that everyone's rights are being, addressed? And how do we make sure that we can talk to each other about these things without feeling like if someone gains, then I must lose, or if someone benefits, then I must be falling down the ladder somehow.
Right.
And challenging anyone who would suggest that is the case, which is obviously an extremely loud voices suggesting that to be the case. And those of us who are aware that there are ways of finding peace and cooperation without packaging it as this is a weakness, but this is a strength. This strengthens our society. Just those voices need to be much more frequent. And I think that people who feel that way are almost intimidated by the voices that suggest that's not the case. And just they're afraid to say, I don't like either of these groups.
Right. Yeah.
I think
there's a lot of people saying that.
Crazy. And just, more people need to be able to voice that and say, we are really just out of control, and we've got to figure out a different way of doing this, because it's not working. Just the same way you would do it in any one-on-one relationship. If you want that relationship to continue, you might need some help. You might need to try to figure this out and learn how to talk to each other, and not just throw up and quit and break it all off. I'm not suggesting that. I do want to ask you. I had another question. Well, I do want to ask you one question. Is that, let's assume everybody in America wanted to start fixing this. We've certainly experienced a certain degree of division, some degree of trauma, whatever that is. How long would it take for us to, personally fix and heal America one-on-one? Considering, January 6th was pretty bad. One of the two political parties walking back their condemnation at a national scale
is pretty bad. 68 million Americans being called enemies of the state basically by Biden is pretty bad. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of people. How long to get all these millions of people to at least, have these conversations and understand and gradually soften back to some sort of workable level of polarization where, or partisanship?
I mean, I guess my question would be, what are we trying to get to, or what are trying to get back, and what was in place and what was not in place when we felt like things were going so well, or when we think this other group is doing it so well. I'm trying to figure out if there was a time when actually things were functioning like to a point where everyone was pretty good with it.
Right.
And not everybody as in, 100%, but like
Right.
general
Of course.
consensus was we were okay with how things were
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
And if all voices were, invited to speak into that. And I'm not sure we've ever gotten there yet. I'm not sure we've figured that out yet. I mean, I see the wounds of slavery as never actually being addressed.
Thank you.
It hasn't been addressed yet at all. And people would say, oh, well, this was a solution. This is like, well, it's like, yeah, but it didn't actually address it fully. And it certainly didn't fix it. So it's just, how long did that take? It's still going. So we haven't admitted that this was, we didn't do what Germany did a decent job of in saying, like, we messed up. Like, we messed up badly, and we went off the rails here, and we should never, ever, ever do that again. And we just haven't done that at all.
Completely agree.
There's some efforts in trying to bring it more into awareness, and there's some efforts, and it's great that there's more people being willing to bring that into just the conversations, but it's a foundational issue that we have not fixed. Definitely have not fixed. I wonder, just if you look at the history of just political, contentiousness in this country, like, I wonder if there's any point where you can say, so are people generally getting along in politics? And I think about the I don't remember what it was. Is some legislator who like whipped another one with his cane or something? It's like, well, that's not good. We wouldn't want to see that.
200 years ago. Yeah. Everyone brings that up, and that was the early formation of America almost 2 centuries ago. Nothing like that said. Oh, no. That was right before the Civil War. At least over 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's just like, are we going through a big change in this country that brings that kind of fueled polarization into place that we can try to make sure that we're civil enough to talk about these things and able to figure out what people actually truly need, and are not just, I'm not just labeling my anger that, I'm sick and not able to afford my lifestyle on it's these people's fault,
Right.
And really getting at some actual root problems. So I would say the how long question is the same kind of answer I give to my students when they say, how long should the paper be? And I say, as long as it takes to get it done.
Fair enough. Okay, we'll move on. I had one last question I did want to ask you, but before I move on, just what I was looking at was that you're right. The legacy of slavery is still there, but specifically I was looking at, I've seen some historians talk about African-American trauma, and that you had the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, and then you had JFK sort of recognizing them, and then you had Bobby Kennedy come into the ghettos for the first time and sort of recognize them. And then all three people got shot in the head. And then you had people like James Baldwin, who was an African-American writer, and others saying, we had it pretty bad. And then the moment some people start talking up on for us and things start looking better, they all get shot. Um, maybe we should not be as open and believing that everything is going to be hunky dory in America. And that attitude basically lasted till the election of Barack Obama in 2008. So we're looking at a period of 48 years. There's the second and third generation Jews whose parents survived the Holocaust. They were talking about multi-generational trauma there going into third generation. If you look at the formation of Israel, it's based upon the Holocaust. You look at the formation of modern Iran, it's based upon the colonization by America. Northern Ireland had the troubles because of Bloody Sunday, where one event, just one, the British came in and shot like 20, 30 people right in broad daylight. They fought them for the next 25 years. So, yes, I don't want to say things never end, but there does seem to be this idea that a group of people, a nation in the proto sense, can hold on to some trauma for decades.
Oh yeah,
and finally get rid of it.
Yeah.
So we might be looking at something here in America. I'm just wondering, after January 6th, do people get over it in 2 weeks, or does it take 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, or several generations. Where, I mean, is this something? I think this is one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm obviously seeing a historical event, but is this going to make it into a history book,
right,
or not?
Right.
And it's like, how long are we going to recognize that this was something that really was not something we blow off as just, it's just another, it's the First Amendment, we're redressing our grievances to the government. We're doing that. It's like, no, that wasn't that. That was definitely not that. That was definitely something else. And so just how do we talk through our trauma? I mean, one of the worst things you can do with trauma is, never pretend like it didn't happen, or just act as if it didn't happen and let that gnaw at you constantly. So having a place where that can be talked through, and just looking at how do we resolve trauma at varying levels of group size, and applying it to whole countries is like, I think that it's long overdue for many things that people realize. What you don't realize, this thing that everyone said was a great idea completely obliterated and decimated my area of the country or my family. And whatever you thought was great for progress or whatever, and like you benefited from it, we got screwed on that deal. Like, you didn't realize that. And like, just more awareness of like, gosh, sometimes it's just like, we didn't even realize there was this flip side to this that was detrimental to groups, and people are kind of upset that other people don't recognize or realize that. And sometimes it's just not being aware that it even happened, or not being aware that it was so widespread and affected people so much. So, and there's different ways of solving conflicts. There's evidence-based, initiatives that can work. So it's really just are we willing to try that out, or, are we dealing with a runaway train that we just gonna have to let crash and then just start over again? It's just that's kind of our options, and it's always been our options. We've gotten through some pretty rough periods of American history, and I feel like every generation has to step up and try to make sure that America works, somehow. And sometimes those solutions are not so well thought out, and sometimes they're not so bad. And we're just in one of those moments again where we have a lot of work to do, and I'm 46 too, and it's our turn, man. Like, it's our turn.
It's our turn. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing this. But I find that one of the best things I can do is ask the difficult questions that don't seem to be asked. And I'm not trying to be negative, but I think the best way to deal with the problem is to look at all aspects of it. Like, if a patient has cancer, you don't go, oh, that's scary. You examine every aspect of it. You don't go, well, I don't want to examine the cancer to the point that I could know that the patient's going to die. You examine it, and if that's the result, you accept that, but you take the data wherever it goes. And I find in our national conversation, there's a lot of, I don't want to go that far. That's just kind of a scary dimension. Let's just stop the conversation here. And I find that to be is useful as a doctor saying, I don't want to fully examine all that cancer. I only want to examine it 80% because the next 20% could scare me and scare you. So I just won't look into it. And I go, well, then you're not really going to understand the problem. And then maybe with your 80% examination is going to result in an 80% solution. And you didn't actually cure the cancer. You left a little bit intact, and then the person dies later on. That doesn't save anybody. And I just look at some of these traumatic events, and it's, you could, Israel, Iran, Northern Ireland, nation states basically formed around one traumatic event. You could look at some of the indigenous groups. I think there's the one in North Dakota, the Lakota Nation, where they launched their own passports. That's still going back to, I think, the massacre around Wounded Knee was the real, wow, they'll just come in and shoot 150 of us at a shot. That's still there. So you can have one giant traumatic event, and it shapes a group of people who hold on to that and form a cohesive policy body that extends decades into the future. And we have multiple examples of that. Now, certainly nothing on the scale, but I just wonder. Certainly, we could also say that if we look at this group called the Americans, many of them viewed themselves as British until this thing called the Boston Massacre, where they go, oh my God, the English will actually just kill us.
Yeah,
right?
we will kill ourselves. Yeah, we will kill us, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
we will kill. And
that's not us anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one event shocked the hell out of people. You had people like Benjamin Franklin, my favorite founding father, who was a loyalist to the crown until that event. A lot of people don't. A lot of the founding fathers were loyalists to the crown until that one event. And then they go, whoa, no, I'm not. So we don't like to hear that story that there was a lot of Americans who were loyal to the King of England, and that not everybody was willing to break away initially. It was the Boston Massacre kind of tipped the scale. And they're like, oh, so I'm just worried about that. But that's neither here nor there. Last question. You're from Ann Arbor, Michigan?
Yeah.
And now you live in Kentucky. One of the questions I've had is people have said, well, you need to reach out to the other side. You need to talk to a conservative. You need to talk to a liberal. And I thought, okay, I have family who are Republican in Santa Monica, California.
Uh-huh.
And I have family who are Republican in rural Dumas, Texas. They do not think alike.
No.
So if I go down to my local, if I live in downtown San Francisco, California, super liberal, and I go down to my local Starbucks and I meet someone who says he's a Republican, and he's really a Republican for tax reasons and lower regulation, and he agrees on we don't need to scare LGBTQ people, maybe we don't need assault rifles, and I go, I just bridged the divide. I just met a Republican and he agreed with 80% of my social issues. See, America's saved. Did I really do anything unless I'm talking to the conservative in rural Kentucky, rural Texas, rural Illinois, where everybody around there has a totally different viewpoint than everybody in San Francisco? We have these regional voting blocks. Everybody in San Francisco roughly votes the same. For me to go within that same voting block and say I talk to conservative, is it just as good as saying I talk to conservative where you're at? Are the conservatives in Ann Arbor, Michigan exactly the same as conservatives in Kentucky? Or is there noticeable differences?
Oh, there's absolutely differences. And I think that's the problem with the categorization I was talking about, is you cluster people on into a profile that's some of those they're definitely there for, and others they're not. People are voting for different reasons. Sometimes it's a policy issue. Sometimes it's just I'm loyal to this party because my parents did this. So some of it's just long-standing tradition of this is how we vote. That's talked about in several social circles where it's well, this is just how we vote. But no real analysis of why, what are we valuing, and are the people that we're voting for actually doing what feels like it's, or seems like it's moving the needle in the direction I want it to be.
Right.
So, you know, I've heard some people say like, I've actually would love this if every ballot just had names on it, and you would have to figure out what their policies were, and you couldn't
Right.
just vote straight party ticket.
Hey.
And more people representing different things. So with very little surprise, I want to make sure that we have excellent educational systems in the United States. So I vote on that as my primary reason. And I also want to make sure that all humans are getting the rights they deserve, and so that's how I vote as well. And so, whatever party represents that value is who I'm going to vote for. And you're a history buff. You know that the parties are malleable. I mean, that
very much so.
Completely social constructs, and we can flip them however we want, and they change. And the Democratic Party has changed, the Republican Party has changed, and people need to really start thinking about, like, is this group that I've been loyal to for all these years, are they still representing the values that, when I look at my values and say, does this person match up with those values or not? And I think we may be getting to a point where people are so tired of just being like, I don't like my options every time I go into the ballot box. I don't know if that's going to be the turning point for some of these solutions, where you have the main person who's going to focus on taxes, and the main person who's going to focus on education. Then you have to almost like vote for these more specific values. But it's just the like many things, I think the red state, blue state, Republican, Democrat categorization has just completely simplified everything and made us into feeling like we can't get out. We're almost trapped in this cluster, in this profile. It's just like, I absolutely refuse to do that. And if someone's like, well, why in the world would you value that? And I'm like, well, I actually looked into best practices, and this point is actually it has a better outcome. And it's just like, they're like, oh, well, they might not change their mind, but it's a long-standing process that has gained traction generationally before us, that could have been driven by trauma. It could be by the whole, like, we need to make sure that never happens again, is famous last words for creating a big problem down the road.
Thank you. We'll stop there. Thank you. Yeah, I was reading a book by Jared Diamond on why societies collapse, and he said one of them, the problems is they can't figure out what the problem of their society is. The other one, the societies collapse because they can't fix it quick enough. And the third one is they make the problem worse by whatever they did, and they didn't see the unforeseen consequences of whatever mitigation they did. Like, I think it was like Guatemala, they were running out of water, so they said, let's dig the wells deeper, and that just made the collapse happen even sooner. So they were trying to fix it, Herculean effort. You made it way worse. It would have been better if you did nothing. Okay, so last two questions. You're not you, you're not me. You're a third person who's going to watch this video. You've never met this person. You'll never meet them. They're watching this video. They learned a lot about psychology, learned a lot about the country, how to think about things, how not to think about things, what to watch for. But they're struggling to recall all of it. They're watching this video, and it's 5 days after they finished watching the video, and they go, I struggled to remember all of it, but there was this one thing that the professor said on political polarization, and I just cannot get it out of my head. What is that one thing you want a random person 5 days from now after watching the video to not be able to stop thinking about?
I think I would hope that they would recognize that they have important things to contribute to this society, and other people have important things to contribute to society, and start to recognize the value in people that bring different ideas and skills to contribute.
That's good. I hope you found this was a fair interview. We didn't put words in your mouth. You got to say your piece unedited.
Yeah, sure.
You don't have to, but we always ask for recommendations. We like to keep the conversation going. Do you know anybody who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? They could be on the left, they could be on the right, they could be an academic or an activist. Doesn't matter. We just like to keep the conversation going.
I have a friend of mine who is excellent. He's old Ann Arbor buddy, lives in New York. His name is Damon Root. And I would absolutely watch your interview with him. But yeah, I would. He's great.
What school is he at?
He's not at a school. So he's not a professor. But he is. I think he works for Reason Magazine. He's wrote a couple books on the Supreme Court. So yeah, very much a scholar, and published scholar, and very, very good thinker. Very different than me in many ways, but I love him dearly, and I think he's a really smart guy, and we'll have plenty to say here.
I found him, Damon Root at Reason Magazine. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and the Federalist Society. Okay, nice. I really appreciate that. We'll end it there. I want to say thank you for coming out, Professor. Thank you for being willing to explore topics outside the specific arena that you studied. I really appreciate it. It helps the audience to understand these topics more. A lot of people are not familiar with the academic level material. They're also not familiar with the intricacies, and it helps the public to be able to have the truth boiled down into something that's manageable for them to digest. So I really appreciate your time with that. Thank you. I'll email you soon a copy of the video, and we'll go from there.
I have one more recommendation. I'm sorry to add
Yes.
that at the last minute, but if you haven't spoken to Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, I don't know if I saw him on your list, but if you haven't spoken with him, I definitely would.
You're the second person to recommend him in 20 hours. So I just didn't
awesome.
go. You need
he has an excellent theory called moral foundations theory that very much explains the emotions that fuel political differences, and that was very eye-opening. And I can't remember where he is. He is a professor. I can't remember where he is, but he would be a great person, excellent person who can actually speak very directly to some of the things you're talking about. So
I have his contact info. We'll give it another shot, and I really appreciate it. A lot of people mention him. I mean, he's one of the big fish I want to get. So
yeah,
move it there. Right. Thank you for the recommendations. I'll email you soon. And I want to say thank you for your time. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. It was great. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.